Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, host and head bookologist here at the Get Literate podcast. I'm a book-loving, notebook-hoarding reader and writer on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. On this podcast, we explore the power of bookology and leading literate lives. We talk all things books and reading and notebooks and writing, mixed in with mindful practices and creativity to create lives we love. You can expect regular weekly episodes focused on 3 books you need to know about on a bookish theme and how to bring those themes to life in our actual lives too. You can also expect author interviews, notebooking inspiration, and topics to help us grow through what we go through and take inspired action to make our lives better. So grab a notebook and your TBR list and let's get literate. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Get Literate podcast and welcome to the first episode of 2024. Happy New Year, everyone. I thought long and hard about the kind of episode I wanted to start the year out with. I mean, first impressions set the stage, right? I toyed between my favorite episodes focused on book themes, like books for setting goals or books for wintering. Then I thought about episodes on writing I could do, like how I've pretty much completely changed my morning pages over these early winter months, or what my 2024 notebook stack looks like. I also knew that author episodes are always popular, and perhaps I could reach out to a new author to kick the year off. Or if I really think about what you loved as listeners, the most popular episodes, as I discussed in a recent podcast episode, were those where I invited on bookish friends. And we talked about all things books and reading or notebooks and writing, and we just brought our passions to life. But there's one practice that I do every month that ultimately helped me make the decision of which episode to bring to you today. Now, if you're new to me, you might not know this yet, but for a long time, I would choose a word of the year to guide my living, right? Like many of us do. But then 2020 hit, and that word just would not hold true the entire year. So I shifted, and I shifted to choosing a different word each month to help me focus my intentions. And I have not looked back ever since. And now I invite my community to do that same practice. And together we read and write and learn our way through the month, embodying this particular theme. So if you follow me on social media, then you know the one-word theme for January is matter. I know it's kind of different, right? It's not your typical grandiose New Year's resolution, goal-setting kind of word. Instead, it's a quiet, reflective, very important idea of mattering. That no matter where we are in the world, in our life, in this moment, we matter. We are enough. No matter how much money is in our bank account, the accomplishments on our resume, the to-do list that we have in front of us, or whatever we happen to see when we look out our window, it doesn't matter because we are the only things that matter. And I thought it would be such a different way of ringing in a new year to focus on what I already have, what's already going well, and that even if it isn't, it doesn't matter. I'm still enough. I'm still good. I'm still okay. And so are you. So when I thought more deeply about my one word and what it means to matter and how I want to matter in the world at this point in my life, the decision of what to do for this episode became awfully clear. One of the ways that I want to matter in the world is around the messages that I share about books and reading and writing and notebooks. Surprise, surprise, right? I have spent my entire career helping students learn how to read, helping teachers teach students how to learn how to read, helping teachers become literacy specialists so that they can help students learn to read. I have focused most of my career on the how. How can we get that important message out there so that we all can read? But my work has been shifting. It's not needed. Well, no, that's not the right way. The only thing that is needed is not just how to learn how to read, but why? And so what, right? Why does it matter? So my work has been shifting, as you know, because I've been sharing it here, to not just how to do this work, but how it can change our lives, how it can make us feel better, how it can make us healthier, how it can make us wiser, how it can make us more empathetic, and how it literally can help us change the world in whatever way we want to. That's how I want to matter. Now, if you've been with me for a while, you've heard me talk about a word that I made up. I made it up, but it'll be a real word pretty soon because the trademark is almost here. And that word is bookology. I was trying to put a word on what it is that I do, what it is I want to do, and how I matter. And when I think of that word matter, I think of books, right? Books and reading, notebooks and writing. I'm learning how to blend that together with mindfulness and creativity to just make life better. And along the way, I started calling myself a bookologist, right? The person who loves books and notebooks so much and wants to share that love with others in carefully constructed experiences, whether that's a podcast episode, a personalized book apothecary, a notebook apothecary, or coaching or courses. This is the direction that I want to go in 2024 to leave my stamp on the world and to matter. So when I thought of that, and I thought of all of the plans that I have for myself in this aspect, I knew there was one person who I would love to talk to on the podcast who basically kind of launched all of this for me. And that person I'm talking about, and the person that I am talking to today on the podcast, is Bijal Shah. Bijal is a bibliotherapist and a counselor and founder of Bibliotherapy, a website and company dedicated to helping people grow through books. I first found her online. I ended up taking her course. She created a beautiful personalized book prescription for me to help me personally grow through what I was going through. And I knew in my heart that I wanted to be Bijal when I grew up. That's what I wanted to do. So I made that really bold, brave move of reaching out to Bijal and telling her how much she had impacted me and my work. And by the way, would she want to come on to the podcast? And thankfully for us, she said yes. And Bijal is here to talk all things bibliotherapy today, what it is, how it works, how books can heal, especially when paired with her literary journaling method, and so much more. And she'll also talk about her new book, which is launching soon, that I am so excited to share with all of you. So without further ado, let me hand it over to the interview with Bijal Shah. Bijal, welcome to the Get Literate podcast. I am beyond excited that you are here today to talk about my favorite topic.
I'm so excited to be here, honestly, and I mean, it's my favorite topic too. So I think we're just gonna have such a blast on the
Yes,
podcast.
yes,
Yeah.
we definitely are. We are. You know, ever since I was a little girl, I've always loved books and reading, as I'm sure you did and many listeners do. But it went beyond something that I like to do. It went beyond something that I thought I was good at, or, I was called a bookworm. For me, books, even though I didn't have a name for it yet, books intuitively just made me feel better, right from the start as a kid, whether it was because I met a character in a book that I felt like was an actual friend, right? Or if I traveled someplace or got to do something inside of the pages of a book that I didn't get to do in my own life. Books just made me feel better. And it felt like life was better as a result of reading that. now
Yeah.
I know that that whole field has a name, right? I didn't know that was a thing as a kid. I just leaned into something I love to do that field felt really good. And now, I spent my whole career kind of chasing that bookish love. First as
Yeah.
an educator, a
That
literacy
feeling.
specialist, yes, a literacy coach. I just wanted to spread that feeling that I had to everyone else. And the past couple of years, I've really been letting myself go down the rabbit hole of books and reading and why they matter and why they're helpful and how they can make life better. And now I know there's a term and a whole field of research called bibliotherapy on the topic. And that is where you come in, because bibliotherapy is your thing, right? You research, you teach about it. You are a therapist, a bibliotherapist. You have this amazing
Yeah,
site.
counselor and bibliotherapist. Yeah.
Okay. You've got your website, book therapy, you have a book coming out. You didn't know it until now, but you have been such an inspiration in my own bookish journey and figuring out how and why books matter so much to me, that I just feel like I have to pinch myself that I get to talk to you in person today, because you really have been such an inspiration from afar in this field. So thank you. First, I'm going to start by thanking you for the work that you do. It's so important.
No, thank you so much. It's honestly a pleasure to be here, and I really thank you for the opportunity to talk about bibliotherapy, because my goal really is to raise awareness of it and the fact that it exists, and how we can all just get more out of our reading, because I think there is so much we can get out of our reading beyond just being a passive reader. So
Yes.
that's really like my goal with everything that I do. It's sort of the mission.
And it comes through in everything you do for sure.
Oh,
Before we jump into what bibliotherapy is, can you give listeners kind of the background on you and how you came to this field yourself?
yeah, sure. So I actually started off as a mathematician. I worked in investment banking. I mean I trained as an accountant. I was very sort of numbers heavy, but I absolutely loved to read, and reading has always just been that, safety net for me throughout my life, my sanctuary. But what happened was I always also had this deep passion for psychology, and I always really wanted to help people. And, in banking, you're helping people in a different way. And I wanted that sort of one-to-one personal connection. I love to understand how people work, how the mind works, how the brain works, what interrelationship dynamics are all about. And I was fascinated. So I ended up sort of doing some training in counseling. And then as part of that, I had to be in my own therapy with a therapist. And I've ended up using books like massively. I really, really was taking in literature to every session. And, during that time, I recognized that there is actually this whole thing called bibliotherapy, like this whole field of research out there that's just stuck in academic archives and at university level. And there's even a history which I talk about in the book.
Yeah.
And I was a bit sort of, yeah, taken aback as to like, I literally went down a rabbit hole, and I felt like this needs to be told to the world, like the world needs to know this. And even though there have been, lots of books written on bibliotherapy, lots of academic studies, I just did not feel like it was mainstream enough, and I did not feel that people just were even aware of the term bibliotherapy. Everyone would ask me, what's that? It was very novel concept. And so my goal was then to kind of bring these techniques that I was using in my own therapy to everyone, readers worldwide who are fascinated by reading, and also by this process of using books as an adjunct to counseling, not just talk therapy. So that was basically what happened. I finished the training. I still continued in banking for a bit, and then when the time was right, when I moved to San Francisco with my husband, that's when I launched book therapy, which is essentially the bibliotherapy practice. And it's also a literary curation service. So as a natural extension, if people don't necessarily want something therapeutic, I do also offer, bibliotherapy sessions of personal interest. And that's also been quite popular. and also therapeutic book prescriptions, so curated reading lists for therapeutic interests. And that sometimes people don't want to talk therapy session, they just want to know what to read. And that was essentially my service there, the personalized reading service. So that kind of came together, and then the bibliotherapy sessions came in, which was all about using, books in talk therapy. And I solely do that. I have a very different approach and way of working. I require all my clients to do a bit of literary journaling, as I call it, as the foundation for our work together. And then, of course, there are lots of other techniques that I use, both reading and writing techniques, that I share. Of course, I share more about that in the book, and also on my website. There are lots of free articles to navigate through to get a sense of what that is. But things like poetry therapy, narrative therapy, reflective practice. And for people who don't like to journal, audio journaling, where they just record their reflections through their voice. So that's been quite a powerful tool for many readers and many of my clients. So it's a combination of, and I call these creative bibliotherapy techniques. So that's something that's kind of come together over the last 6 years. And I'm always learning so much as more and more research is done. And what's fascinating is that when we read, we can't differentiate that experience to a real life experience when we're so immersed. The brain can't differentiate it. So if you look at MRI scans, it's almost as though we are experiencing this event literally. So, well, mind the pun, but
I love the pun.
it's very yeah, but it's very much happening as though it was happening to us. So that's why it's so effective. In using books as much as we can in that way.
Yeah. And I think that's what I didn't know as a child, because it truly felt so real to me. And it wasn't until later as a teacher, when I learned about how the brain works and this idea of mirror neurons and how it works when, when you're reading or experiencing, to really know that the thing I love to do could also be the thing that could be a game changer in so many ways for health and wellness and all of the things. I have so many different directions that I could take this conversation, because you have said so many things that have just like lit my reading heart on fire right now.
Yeah.
I do want to ask, well, I have a couple of things I want to ask, but I'd love to know how you personally define bibliotherapy, because there are a couple of different definitions out there depending on where you look and who you ask. And I'd love to know how you define that for someone who hasn't heard the term or doesn't quite understand what the whole concept could be about.
Yeah, sure. So at Book Therapy, we have a very specific definition of bibliotherapy, and I'd quite like to talk to you, to talk to you about that and sort of outline it in more detail. So I'm just gonna sort of bring up the exact definition that we use, if that's
Sure.
okay.
Oh, absolutely.
So at Book Therapy, we define bibliotherapy as a form of art therapy that focuses on leveraging the power of stories to heal. Its power lies in the relationship that's formed between the reader and the writing, whether that's narrative, poetry, or essay, and then the reflection of the thoughts, feelings, observations, and lessons that the writing provokes through a daily journaling practice, which I mentioned. I call that literary journaling, or through a bibliotherapy workbook, or through a counseling session with a mental health professional or a bibliotherapist, or even librarians sometimes use it as part of their reading advisory work.
Yeah. And I love that definition because it's broad enough to invite a lot of people into it, right? You don't have to be, in therapy or in counseling to benefit from reading a book in a particular way to get something out of it. So it really is for everyone.
Yes.
Those that love reading, those that are trying to figure out, how reading can help them, those that are in therapy, those that want to do this on their own. And I love how you
Absolutely.
bring in writing with it too, because that's a whole nother episode, right? On the power of writing and
Yes.
scriptotherapy, if you will, to pair with
Yes.
bibliotherapy.
Yeah, writing therapy. Yep, yep, 100%. The whole writing part of it is really processing the emotions, giving yourself an outlet to express those emotions that might have been stuck, either in the body, in the mind. There's an outlet, and then when you go back to that writing a day or two later, you can sort of reflect on it, see if something's changed or shifted for you. You might feel the same, you might not feel the same. That consolidation aspect after the end of a period of journaling is really important to sense where you are now. So it's these little iterations of journaling that help you slowly get those emotions unstuck. So I really, really advocate it as a great initial tool to use, as a stream of consciousness tool to use, to get a sense of where you are, to get a sense of a bit of self-awareness, as to how you're feeling. You might also have gained something from the literature, some sort of insight that's been cathartic or healing for you, that must not be forgotten, that must be kept at the forefront of your mind as you're going through your day. So all of those things the journaling helps with. And then of course the other techniques will then, I'd say, a step above. So reflective practice, narrative therapy, that also goes a bit beyond the journeying way. We are actually now taking goal-orientated actions towards trying to get to where you want to get to. So reflective practices is a method of writing where it's very goal-orientated. You already know from the outset what you want to get out of the literature and what you want to achieve at the end of it. And so you're really using the literary reflections to attain those goals. So that's slightly different to journaling. And I sort of talk about these techniques in more detail in the book. But then again, like narrative therapy, I wouldn't say it's only isolated to bibliotherapy. It's also a practice that lots of psychologists and speech and language therapists use it with children. Very much about reauthoring your story with a positive spin to make sense of what's happened to you, even sometimes to gain closure on things that you've been struggling with. And just really authoring your story in a coherent manner, to give you a sort of a firmer ground on how you're feeling about aspects of your life that previously might have been weighing you down or have been a challenge to accept.
Yeah. That's where I actually first found you. I love the idea of reauthoring your story, and books offer us so many different lenses to a particular thing or concept or challenge or whatever it is we're going through. And I first, met you, and I'm saying it in air quotes because it was through email, because I purchased one of your book prescriptions. I was going through a difficult time, health-wise, in my own life. I was dealing with a chronic illness, a challenging illness, and you offered a prescription, and you collect some information, to see a little bit more about the person and what we want and what we need. And I'm going to say within a day, I had this wonderful book list that did a couple of things for me. I think number one, you went right to what I wanted, which is, here are books where you're going to feel seen. There are other characters that are going through this kind of thing. But then there were also books that weren't, at least in my mind at first when I read them, they weren't on the outside books that I thought that I would have thought of myself, but they were kind of complementary that I would not have picked up on my own, because a quick read of the back cover, I thought, oh, no, that one's not for me. But you, with your knowledge of books and your knowledge of bibliotherapy, kind of put together this text set that when I read them just gave me so many more ideas to think about, where my story, I was limiting my own story based on could not get out of my own head. And your book recommendations gave me a different side to the story that I could consider, that just made made me feel better. And that's what I was, I wanted books to make me feel better. And your collection that you gave was just so, it was perfect. It was perfect. and
Oh,
we met through email. So that is the power of your work. And I'd love to know how you do that, right? Because I love books. I read a lot. I love suggesting books that I think are for the right people at the right time. But I'd love to pick your brain on how you curate such wonderful book lists like that for your clients. What is involved and how do you do that?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the question. No, I'd love to share more. I mean, there's two things really that come to mind. Firstly, the prescription has to be tailored to your interests, needs, reading habits. The first thing that I think about as part of this whole process is the identification that you feel with a book, either with the author or the protagonist of the character or the writing. And for that identification to happen, you've got to feel a connection to the book. So that those are and then once identification happens, there's a sense of mutual empathy and catharsis and healing, and insight. And so to get to that point, this process, I have to first figure out what are the kind of books that you like, what are your reading preferences, what are the things that you're struggling with, what have you enjoyed in the past, what else should I know, even down to what reading mediums you prefer, from like audio-visual, like audio, Kindle, paperback, because of course if that book's not available in that medium, that's not going to be helpful to you. But all of those things, and the first and foremost thing is that connection that you feel. Like if you don't feel that connection, then you're not going to pick up that book or read it. So it has to be absolutely tailored to the person. And so I kind of get a sense of a picture of who you are first. That's my most important concern. And then of course I have a database of what's worked for clients in the past and what's not, but also doing lots and lots of research in terms of what book is going to work for you in those parameters and that framework that I use. But secondly, I've also over time developed this reading intuition, I call it, and I talk about developing your own reading intuition in the book. That's in Bibliotherapy, the healing power of reading, that's coming out next year. But I talk about that, and it's very much over time you kind of just know what's going to work for one person, what's not, after years and years of curating. So, and also feedback. I get a lot of feedback from my clients, which has been so helpful. And then of course clients even initially will share so much with me in terms of books that they've loved. I've had people sharing their entire like Goodreads reading list, or is it Libex, or there's a couple of other places, reading trackers, where you can track what people have read in the past. So that's obviously been really helpful. So you just get a sense of, this person's like a memoir reader, or this person will love novels, but they like fantasy fiction and they only like this type of author, or they only want to read, female authors, or they're interested in books from the female gaze perspective. So it is developing that sort of mindset. And really trying to get a sense. And of course, like if people don't resonate with something, then I will be like, don't force yourself, tell me, and I will suggest something else, because I would never want anybody to feel forced to read something that they just are not going to want to read. That's just not the way I operate. So I do offer this sort of 2-week period where you can just come back and tell me, actually, I didn't like this, or I've read this, or I'm just not connecting. I really tried, and sometimes people, I'll suggest things and they'll be reading it and then they'll switch to audio and they'll just be like, yeah, this makes complete sense. So sometimes it's the medium, as well. Like I've had clients who just haven't been able to get into something, but once they've been listening to the narrator, that emotional element that is often missing in text, but is available on audio, they just switch and they're into it and they're really resonating. So and connecting. So essentially that's sort of my methodology for choosing books that hopefully will work. And often I will throw in a few surprise books, because it's like you said, it's the unknown unknowns. It's what you don't know is out there that sometimes you really want to know, and that would be really helpful to you. And of course, a different perspective, novelty, different perspectives, that reframing can really be healing as well. So that's what I'm also aiming for sometimes, to just give you something a little bit different to be open to, that might work.
And that's what I appreciated about it, right? Because I could see the instant connection to some books, but the other connections weren't as clear until I really got into the book and thought, oh yeah, this is what I needed. And I that's the kind of balance I like, because in my own reading life, and a lot of my community members join in and doing this with me too, I usually pick one word a month to guide life, right? Some people choose a word of the year. I can't commit to a word for that long, so I just choose a word of the month. And I intentionally read books that I think are going to cultivate that word, that feeling for me. But I love,
wow.
yeah, it's fun. But I love when I read a book that I didn't necessarily have a purpose for, but suddenly these unexpected lessons are popping up, and they
Yeah.
lead me to take, some inspired action in some aspect of my life that I didn't see coming. And I love both. I love that purposeful, let's use books to make life better, but also just be open to what you might learn that you didn't expect, that can just broaden your idea of who you are, or what others are like, or what the world is even, capable of. I love having that balance.
It's like that phenomenon of, if you never knew about something, and then you hear it once, and then you see it everywhere.
Yes.
It's like that feeling found in books, where you're like, you know what? I was actually just thinking about this morning, and here it is. It's this kind of coincidental sign.
Yes.
And you do get that phenomena, and we haven't really been able to explain that with science yet, but I think there probably is something there that eventually we might be able to put together, because I do sort of strongly believe in coincidences and the magic of serendipity, that phenomena.
Yes, I do
Just
too.
like a lot of invisible things that we didn't know about before, like gravity, or um, how to make fire, or all those things that exist, that unknowns that we're still working through. But there is a serendipity with books, and I do also reflect on that quite a lot in the book as well. But I do feel like, there's something there in the magic of books, and the unknown unknowns, and then in being open to a book, because it might just bring you something that you never knew
Yes.
would have helped.
Yeah.
Surprise discoveries.
Yeah. That's what I
Yeah.
love. And sometimes those lessons are big, right? They're life lessons that might help make a big decision or make a shift in mindset. But sometimes they're small,
Yeah.
that bring a lot of joy. Like I've talked about on my podcast before, there's a couple of books, the ones that come to mind are The Magic of Lemon Drop Pie by Rachel Linden, or This Time Could Be Different by Kristen Weierman. Those books prompted me to do things I would have never have done in my regular life. I actually baked a gluten-free lemon meringue pie from scratch after being inspired by the character in the book. I made my own face cream. I made my own audio meditation. I did things that Stephanie would never do, right? Unless the book showed me that that's actually a thing that is possible. So I love that idea of taking action in some sort of way after you read a book, whether it's big and you journal about how your mind is changing and your mindset's changing, or it's little and you bake something and you feel better. It all works.
Yeah, it all kind of just, something will strike a chord, and you'll feel like you'll maybe start seeing yourself through the eyes of the other character, and that feeling
Yes.
of reframing your own narrative, because you're now looking at yourself from a different perspective, can bring so many shifts, micro shifts as I call them, and validation as well. And novelty. I mean, one of the things that that has opened me up to a lot of different ways of looking at things is novelty. I never really used to be that open to newness, but now I'm like, I need a lot of novelty in my life because it's healing. Novelty is healing. New perspectives, new ways of looking at the world, and authors often bring that because they help you highlight the blind spots in your life, through their own experiences of either through fictional characters or true stories or memoir writing, and things that you might not have even considered. So yeah, so I can totally understand your experience of like doing something different, like baking or making a face cream, or that's that's definitely a life lesson for me, like to just introduce novelty. The minute something feels a bit shaky or overwhelming, just take a step back and perhaps look at things from a new perspective, or do something different to what you would have done.
Yeah. And I'm just getting right now, as I listen to you talk about novelty, that novel is inside of novelty. And that's how we're getting
Yeah.
from the pages of the book.
Yeah. And it's funny because I always call bibliotherapy and novel therapy. And again, there's two sides to it. Yeah.
I love it. I love how that just came together for me. So I know you rely on the literary journaling to really help you think about where you are and what you want to get out of your books. And you've mentioned a couple of different activities or practices that you talk about in your new book, which we'll get to next so that everyone can go out and pre-order it. But do you recommend a particular practice or a particular journaling method as we're reading the book, so that journaling can help us know which books to choose? But do you recommend reading in a particular way to get the most out of it as well?
Yes, I mean, I have an article on my website on literary journaling, as I call it, and I often use like this 3-step approach to literary journaling. Firstly, it's just sort of writing what comes to mind, like really following this stream of consciousness approach. And then the second method, I would say, is essentially, consolidating everything you've read, everything you've written, coming back to it and then just thinking about, has something changed for me? Do I still feel the same? That's really important to kind of just get a sense of where you are in the here and now, because that's what kind of journaling does. It sort of puts you in the present moment. And then really going away and taking some action points after that, in terms of what are you going to do with what you've learned, and how are you going to implement the lessons and insights that you've gained, because essentially that's the closing piece of the journaling aspect. It's great to journal and put things down on paper and get a sense of how you're feeling, but at the same time, it's also important to think about, like, what am I going to do with all these reflections and things that I've noted, that I've gained? How am I going to implement them, and not just to leave them hanging? So that would be like my 3-step methodology. And of course, if you need some prompts, I've got prompts on the website. There's a guide called 365 book journaling ideas for every day of the year, just to get some inspiration, because I often find it's helpful to have some prompts. Just basic things like, how did this character make you feel? Like, if you feel really angry at a character, why? Is it reminding you of something from your past? Is that something you need to explore in more detail? This irritation, are you projecting that onto them? And it's really giving you some sort of clues into your own past, or things that you might need to go and explore further. This dynamic that's being created between you and the character, as you would with a therapist in a one-to-one session. Sometimes you might feel angry at a therapist, and why? Are you replaying a relationship in the past that's caused you a lot of, I don't know, angst? So essentially it's really capturing that in the journaling and not letting it just slide as a passing thought, because that's important. And then that's what I would take to, if you have a therapist, take it to them, or if you don't have a therapist and you want to do it yourself, leave it, come back to it in a few days. Do you feel the same? Why? Dig a bit deeper. You can do the work yourself. You really can. And other times it could just be like, I really felt connected to this person. Why? Like what need are they meeting for me? Why am I so drawn to them? And then working out how you're going to get that need met in real life, and what are you going to do? What are the steps that you're going to take?
Yes.
Right.
That right there, that is the power. That I think is where the power comes. I have those questions. I've used those questions in my own journal. And I think that is the hardest part. I would say that last step is the hardest part, because the reading is fun and enjoyable and easy, right? And thinking about what you might do or change or try can be easier than actually doing the thing and going deeper. And I think that's where a book prescription is one level, but then, like you said, the services of putting bibliotherapy inside of a therapy session or using it to go deeper, that's really where the magic can happen. But prompts and support and a little nudge, right, is often needed to bring that to light. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you might find that a character just does not care about something, and you're like, well, if that was me, I'm a people pleaser, for example. You might be thinking, you might be saying to yourself, and then you might be like, but that character just does not care. And why? What is it? Are they just really good at setting boundaries? Is it just their frame of mind? And sometimes you may just want to role model them. So and that's why good characters in a book are really worthwhile, and so authors who can do that are wonderful, phenomenal, in giving you something solid to work with.
Yeah, they really can teach us so much. And as you mentioned in the beginning, our brain doesn't necessarily know or can't really tell the difference if it's real life or not. So it feels so real for us.
Yes, exactly.
I love it. And for those of you that are wondering about those questions, they're on your website, and we can put a direct link to those journaling prompts in the show notes, because they are, I know from experience, they are very powerful. And I think everyone would benefit from taking a peek at them.
Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Sorry. Let's talk more about your book. Unfortunately, it's not out yet. We are talking about a little bit early. It is out in February of 2024. Is that still the anticipated date?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the Kindle version and the hardback, and then I think the paperback will be out later in the year. It's out in the UK on those dates, and then in the US it might be out a bit later than that, maybe towards the later end of the year. But you can still pre-order it from the UK and just get it shipped if you really wanted it.
I do.
And I and I'm sure the Kindle version might work similarly. But yeah. So and in the Commonwealth, it should be available either in the form of an ebook or a hardback. So depending on where you are and where your listeners are, yeah, there will be an avenue to get it on the 15th.
Yeah, we just have to be a little bit patient. And it's called Bibliotherapy, the Healing Power of Reading. Is
Yes,
right?
that's right. Yes. Yeah. And it's really a project very close to my heart. It's a real passion project, and it's essentially divided into 3 sections. And the first section talks about what bibliotherapy is, but also the history, going back all the way to the ancient Greeks, to sort of George Eliot and Wordsworth and Freud, and more modern day pioneers in the world wars where it was used. quite extensively to current day research. I mean, there's a lot of research going on across the board, across the world, from the Middle East to the US to Australia to Brazil, this Scandinavia. There's a lot of material out there, and my goal really is to pull that together, all of that together for my readers and clients. So there's a lot. There's a whole history. So if you're interested in the history, there's a little section on that in the first bit. And then, of course, the middle section is client stories. So, what issues clients came with, their stories of what books they read and how these books helped them, what techniques they used. And I try and use each client, I get them to sort of illustrate a different technique that's been used so that people can get a sense of all of these techniques and how they work in practice and how a bibliotherapy session works in practice, and the conversations that I had from the start of the actual prescription, which I put together prior to the session, and then the session and reading it, introducing the books in that session, and then the ongoing sessions and how they feel after it, and what progress they might have made in their therapeutic journeys. So I call that whole section Bibliotherapy Journeys. I also include my own story of how I fell into it and the issues I've grappled with and what books I've used. So obviously, if you're a book lover, there will be a lot of references to a lot of books in there. Yeah. And of course, in the third section, there's a whole reading list arranged in A to Z format, covering different mental health themes from so you could start with anxiety to boundaries to in that A to Z format, and there's fiction and nonfiction and poetry. So there's something for everyone. It's not, self-help is actually a very small fraction of what I prescribe. Like a lot of it, I'd say half of the stuff that I prescribe is fiction and the other half is nonfiction and poetry. So there's tons in there for book lovers. So and I'm hoping it's a good guide, just ever you're feeling low, despairing, going through midlife crisis, going through relationship breakup, going through menopause, going through illness, there will be something for everyone in that book. So that was the goal, was really to be there as a comfort, source of comfort, but also as a source of self-therapy.
Yeah, books are there for us whenever we need them.
They are. Honestly, they are, and there's so much out there. So
yeah,
I just wanted to sort of really find the stuff that's really good and put it in there.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait for it. I am definitely one of the ones who is pre-ordering and will wait a little bit longer for it to get to me, but that is okay. But in the meantime, your website has so much information. I mean, there are a bazillion rabbit holes someone could go down to find books that are going to be perfect for them. You have book lists on your website. You have courses people can take. You have things to download. Can you talk a little bit about where they can find you, so that they can kind of get their book fix in the meantime before your bibliotherapy book comes out, whether that's your website or any social media channels you want to share? Because I imagine people are going to want to learn more from you after this session.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. So booktherapy.io is the website, and there's a lot of stuff on social media and across all the platforms. So depending on what your preference is, Instagram has tons of bibliotherapy posts and resources and links and book recommendations. So does my Facebook page. My Instagram handle's booktherapy_by_Bijal. And then LinkedIn has lots of stuff, X, TikTok, Pinterest, YouTube. So, hopefully there's something for everyone. There are lots of blog posts as well on the website that's free, and lots of reading lists, again, for adults and children. I do a lot of curation for children. So there's obviously the online bibliotherapy course, which is a good introduction and I share a lot of the tools and techniques in that course. And also there's a course for children, for parents now, when they're working with children, parents and teachers and educators, carers, the children's bibliotherapy skills course. And then of course, I've also got a book on raising a reader and storyteller, which is slightly different, which is very focused on engaging children in reading and storytelling. So I have all of those resources there, just to kind of give people hopefully a helpful start on their own bibliotherapy journey.
Definitely a helpful start. Just listening to you and the work you do, it's so exciting. It's so uplifting, for book lovers to know that something they love can also be a really important tool to just make them feel good and make life better. And now to know that someone like you is out there with all of the resources, all of the things, the research. I'm sitting here kind of taking notes of the things I want to put in the show notes and all of your links. And, here I am, in my 40s saying, I want to be you when I grow up because you are doing such important work. I'm so grateful for all that you share. And so much of this is on your website, free for people to just get started in. And then, of course, hopefully grab a book prescription or grab a session. I'm just so thankful for the work that you do. It's inspired me. It has helped me make my life better through books. And I'm just so grateful that you came on to talk about it today. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Stephanie. I'm really grateful for you giving me the opportunity to share more about bibliotherapy and raise awareness of it, because I think it's a really valuable medium for people to be able to use, even if it's on their own. So thank you. And I'm really looking forward to your thoughts on the book once you've had a chance to read it. I really can't wait.
Neither can I. I will definitely share that with you and share it widely because, like you, I believe this is a field, a concept that everyone can benefit from, but not everyone realizes the power at their fingertips through books. And so I'm grateful that I found your work. I will continue to stalk you on social media and learn everything I can from you. So we'll definitely stay connected, and I will work to keep sharing the work that you're doing and the book, and just keep building this really important field. It's just so wonderful to talk to you.
No, thank you. Thanks, Stephanie. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to listening to all your podcast episodes. Definitely something I wanted to do this Christmas.
Well, thank you. That means so much. Thank you so much again for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. Plus, if you want more, you might like to join my Patreon community. There, you'll find additional inspiration for your reading and writing life, like bonus podcast episodes, bibliotherapy book calendars, monthly book clubs, notebooking challenges, live events, giveaways, and much, much more. It's only $5 a month, and you get instant access to all of the previous content too. You can learn more at getliterate.co. And one more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish and notebookish community too. Thanks for listening.